Morning. Welcome to today's edition of the Morning Bagel. I'm your host, Dr. Marc Allan Feldman, Libertarian candidate for president. It's been a cold, snowy, cloudy morning here in Cleveland, Ohio. The roads were kind of a mess, but couldn't stop me from getting my morning bagel and my newspaper. Quite a bit in the news today. I'll start from the top. Rejecting tests, Massachusetts shifts its model. An about-face by the leader of education reform. It's been one of the most stubborn problems in education with 50 states, 50 standards, and 50 tests. How could anyone really know what American students were learning or how well? Well, it turns out that Massachusetts, one of the founding states for what's called Common Core, the testing system, is finding that it's not working. No surprise. As a physician and a scientist, measurement's very important. Measurement's what gives us information to make change, to see how well things are working. But the first thing you need to know when you're planning a strategy for change is, what are you trying to do? What are you trying to measure, and how are you going to measure it? Education always sounds wonderful, but what's the purpose of education? What are we really trying to do with all this time spent with our kids? I'd like to think that we should be helping them to be independent, self-reliant, and be able to use their own power to make a life for themselves. But that's not what our educational system is doing. They say they're trying to produce good citizens. One of the issues that always made me disagree was at the end of high school, having kids have to do some community service in order to graduate. What is the message that we're teaching them? That you have to be basically a slave to the state, to work without compensation, to obey what the authorities tell you to do. I find that reprehensible. Why not have them have to start a small business or run for a school office, participate in PTA or their local politics? Do something. When I was in high school, I thought my favorite class was driver's ed because it taught me a skill that I could use. This is the one thing that they've taken out of the school program. So let's get back to basics. Think, what is the purpose of our education? And then what's the best way of getting it done before we start a testing program where we really don't know what we're measuring? I have to give you a little prologue here. As you have heard, there is an extremist group that's based on Islamic ideology. They want to call themselves the Islamic State. But the fact is, they're not Islamic in that they don't represent Islam. And they're not a state. We learned that the just powers of a state come from consent to the governed, not from fear and force of violence and ideology. So let's call it what it is. It's a cult. This fellow in Iraq, a terrorist who goes by the name al-Baghdadi, had himself installed as caliph, as the leader of the Islamic religion, of the Islamic people all over the world, except the Islamic people don't agree with that. Similar to false messiahs that we've had in the past. Not that different from Jim Jones. We don't say that Jim Jones represented Christianity just because he wanted to be called the People's Temple of the Disciples of Christ. We know he wasn't really Christian, and he didn't represent Christians. Charles Manson of the Tate LaBianca murders. The Manson family, they wanted to start a race war. But we didn't want to make war with them. They were criminals. They're part of a cult. And yes, Charles Manson could very well recite from memory all the words to the Beatles songs that he based a lot of his ideology on. Doesn't make him head of their official fan club. So I don't want to call them ISIS. Let's call them what they are, the al-Baghdadi cult. So what is the Baghdadi cult up to? Well, here's an article about women who apparently have some difficult choices when they're part of this cult. southern Turkey. Dua had only been working for 2 months with a Kansa'a Brigade, the all-female morality police of the Baghdadi Cult, when her friends were brought to the station to be whipped. So what do? Do you help, try to help your friends, or do you get them whipped? Well, for wearing their burqas a little too tight. Well, put themselves in a difficult position. But that's what happens when you're part of a cult. We need to stop thinking of these people as a state. There's two things that the Baghdadi cult wants. Number one, they want to represent Islam. They want territory. They want credibility. And they want to have war with us. And it seems as though there's a lot of politicians who want to help them with that. They want to see them as a great threat, as very powerful, when they're not. And they want to see them as represent Islam when they don't. And they want to make war with them, which we should not do. We should be looking at them as a band of criminals that have taken control of some stolen property, stolen money, and treat it as an international crime, because that's what it is. And here's an article on an inquiry into intelligence on the Baghdadi cult from the military is doing. And yes, they've had some difficulties with it. And one of the points they make is that early on, their own analysts said that they were really on the wrong track. That here's a little nugget I liked here that made sense to me. That the analyst said problems in Iraq were rooted in deep political and religious divides that could not easily be solved with a military campaign, because it's not a military problem. It's a cult. It's a criminal problem and a religious problem from that perspective. Hillary Clinton's having some problems, battling the image of being soft on Wall Street. This isn't an image problem. Clinton represents Wall Street. She works for Wall Street. She's gotten paid millions of dollars by Wall Street. It's like me saying my image as a practitioner of medicine. That's what I am. That's what I do. Basically, Democrat and Republican parties work very similarly. The Democrats get their money from Wall Street and their votes from minorities and the poor. The Republicans get their money from the energy industry and their votes from Christian conservatives. They both represent big business and the wealthy special interests. They don't represent us. Well, thank you very much, and I hope you have a nice week.